and how are you today? Just today it's gone a bit colder here. I've had to go back to a jumper. It's not the best weather, but I'm back indoors and doing some more bread baking, so making the most of that cooler weather, perhaps when you don't want to be outside. Just if I bring my camera down a bit, there we go, you can see a bit more of what I am doing as well. So if you're joining today, I'm going to talk about how to check if your bread dough is risen enough and why you should be doing that. So this is for you if perhaps you've baked bread before and it's turned out a bit more like a brick rather than that light, fluffy bread that you were hoping for. So join me and let me know if you've been baking bread at home, if you've ever turned out a bread that didn't quite turn out as you expected. Perhaps you're turning out really delicious bread, but you just want to check that you're doing the correct things whilst you're baking bread. So I'm just going to mix up some dough as well. So making the most basic, I guess, recipe here, just some flour, salt. Perhaps not the most basic. You can make breads with even just one or with two ingredients, and you'll in fact find that recipe on my YouTube page if you want to go back and look at it. Right, I'm not going to talk because if I talk, I'm going to measure the wrong amount of water in. And I am weighing my water in here. If you ever do this, just find it a bit more accurate if you've got digital scales to weigh the water in. All right, there we go. So I'm just going to carry on making up this dough. So we're talking today about how to check if your dough has risen enough. And this is really focusing on making sure that you don't bake that bread that turns out like a brick. So it is a pretty important one, and having that patience to wait for your dough to rise, because sometimes bread making can seem like it takes time, but luckily it doesn't take any of your time. You can go and do whatever else you need to do while your dough is rising. So I'm just going to make, as a comparison, this dough now. So just mixing together this bread. So if you've ever turned out a loaf that has come a bit like a brick, there is a few reasons why that might happen, and I cover a few more of them in other lives I've done and in information on my YouTube channel. So do go and have a browse. There is a playlist on there for those of you who are just perhaps starting out baking bread, and there's lots of information on there. But one of the reasons, and just to understand what's happening when your dough has risen, so in here I just mentioned I've got flour and yeast and salt with some water. And the yeast are the crucial thing when they're rising your bread. So they're going to digest the flour in the dough that I've now made here. They're going to digest that flour, and as they're digesting that flour, they release carbon dioxide. So breathing out, just a bit like we do when we breathe out, carbon dioxide. And that gas, that carbon dioxide, is what is going to rise your dough. So that is what is happening when you make a yeasted dough like this. That the carbon dioxide that the yeast are producing is what is going to rise your dough. And that process, now you might have seen me put that yeast in, or you might have some yeast at home, especially if you've got dried yeast. So even like a teaspoon of your instant active dried yeast, so the kind of yeast that you can put straight into your dough if you're making bread. Even a teaspoon of that will be several billion yeast cells. So they are microscopic, completely tiny, and they are all gathering together to digest your starch and produce gas. Now, so obviously it's not being produced on a great volume. You're probably breathing out more in about 2 breaths than your yeast are going to breathe out into your dough. But gradually that yeast can build up the gas, that carbon dioxide in your dough, and your dough will hopefully rise. So that is what you are waiting for to happen when you are leaving your dough to rise, for your yeast to get going and on a microscopic level produce enough gas to rise your dough. So do bear in mind that that is really why you have that time constraint when you are making bread, that the yeast do need that time to build up the gas in your dough. All right, if you're watching and we were just discussing, if you're watching and you bake bread at home, perhaps you've got a question about your dough rising, then let me know. So talking today just about how to know if your dough has risen enough when you're waiting for it to rise, and why that's important. So just saying that what is happening when your dough is rising, that your yeast are digesting the starch in the flour and producing carbon dioxide, so letting that dough rise. All right, I think I've kneaded that. I will knead it a bit more, but I'm not going to carry on kneading it too much. So this is the stage you might get to when you've made a piece of dough and you're making bread at home. You've kneaded up your dough and now it's time to leave it to rise. So pop that back in the bowl and you can see when it's just made that this is fairly solid. It's a fairly solid piece of dough. It kind of, it's not puffed out at all. I can kind of squidge it. There's no gas in it at all. It's, you know, very hard. Not hard, but it's very, it's not like I can make dents in it. It's not very squidgeable. There are many words I could use to describe it. It's nice and sticky. It's nice and stretchy. So it will rise, and that is another thing to bear in mind, that your yeast are tiny and they are producing a relatively small amount of gas. So they need to be able to quite easily stretch your dough. But that yeast, the yeast right now have only just got going. They've just got some water there. They've just got some fresh food, that flour, and they are now going to start digesting that flour and producing carbon dioxide. And that process is going to take a while. Now, I mentioned at the start of this, and I don't know where you're watching from. You can let me know if you do want to. But here in the UK, the weather, despite it being allegedly flaming June, the weather has gone cold, windy and rainy today. So it's definitely a lot cooler in here today, and I know that this is going to take a little bit longer to rise. The yeast work a bit more slowly when the temperature is cooler, and so I'm going to leave that now for about an hour to an hour and a half at least. Cover it over to make sure that the dough doesn't dry out, because the yeast also need moisture, and I'm going to leave that to rise. And when you come back, you really want to see some definite changes in your dough. So you really want to be using all your senses when you're baking bread at any stage, but really have a good look. And if you're just starting out, you think, oh my gosh, after an hour and a half, I'm not going to remember. Do take a picture of your dough like this. Some maybe sound a bit weird. You might not think it's the most artistic picture to take, but do take a picture of your dough, and then you can judge it against your dough when you come back. So this is something you can do when you are baking bread at home, and you'll cover it over and leave it. And hopefully you'll come back, we'll switcheroo there, switcheroo, to discover that your dough has risen. So old dough here, nothing happening, solid piece of dough, can't press it down, to quite risen. Now you can probably see in the dough, and I'll let you have a look closer, but I just wanted to start here. I don't know if you can see on the surface underneath this plastic coating that there is actually condensation, because just like you, if you breathe out against a mirror or a window, what happens, it fogs up because you also breathe out moisture. And the same thing is happening here. Partly that some of the moisture will evaporate off your dough, and obviously this is why you have this cover on, so that it keeps the moisture trapped in there and it's a relatively moist environment and the dough doesn't dry out. But also the yeast will produce some liquid, they'll produce some water when they're breathing out that carbon dioxide. So if I turn this off, there is, I don't know if this is going to show up, but you might be able to see, I just kind of drag my finger through the condensation there. All right, and then we look, and hopefully you can see the difference in dough. Same size piece of dough, but this one on top that I just made at the start of this live, solid, quite small, and not nice and smooth on top, and it, as I said, quite hard, can't really poke a hole in it. So it's quite a solid piece of dough, there's no gas in there. Whereas nice and domed, so you're looking for this domed appearance. You can see that it's gone sideways as well in the bowl, and that's really hard because a lot of recipes will say, oh, it should double in size, the dough should double in size. Well, that's hard to judge, especially when it goes sideways as well as up, but you can hopefully see the difference there, that it has doubled in size and it's domed. So it's a bit like a balloon being blown up. So the yeast are producing gas and it's like a balloon blowing up. So it stretches out the top of that dough and it really smooths the top of that dough. So a couple of things to look for there. Your dough has definitely changed in size. Now it's not changed in weight, still the same amount of dough in there, it's just stretched out and taken up more space, like a balloon being expanded. So there, dough, and on top. And then crucially, now you might also be able to see, I don't know if it's going to really see, when you wobble it, it will be a little bit wobbly, like a jelly. And then another thing you can look for is if you push your finger into it, you can make really deep holes. It's like sinking into snow, and you'll make really deep holes. And that's because underneath the surface of that dough, you have made lots of little pockets of gas. You might be able to see some of them. So you might be able to see some of them right there. Little pockets of gas that have stretched out and your dough has risen. The other thing to notice is smell. So this smells, and I appreciate you can't join me in this, but this smells just like flour and water has been mixed together. It's almost got no smell. Whereas here, we've got a slightly sour note and slightly, I guess, yeasty smell, but there's definitely a change in smell because the yeast have been digesting the flour and lots of changes going on there as well. So use all of your senses to know that your dough has risen. And why is that important? Well, if you were to look, and it's a bit hard to see through the bottom of this bowl, let me just get this piece of dough. But if you were to look at this, there's no pockets of gas in it. It's solid. So it's a solid piece of dough. There's no pockets of gas in that. And if you're watching and thinking, how can I know this at home? Or you've got any other questions about your dough rising, then do let me know. But let me know. This is a relatively solid piece of dough. And if you were to bake that relatively solid piece of dough, now obviously this is the first rise, but if you were to shape that and then put it straight into the oven as a solid piece of dough, it won't even bake through. You won't have all those beautiful little pockets of gas that will eventually translate to having a light, airy loaf of bread. So it's a really great thing to know that your dough has risen enough, because eventually those little pockets of gas will turn into that light, airy loaf that you want. And when you slice through the loaf, instead of getting solid, potentially uncooked dough, which is going to be inedible, you actually get a loaf of bread that you can cut up, make sandwiches with. It's well risen and it looks and tastes delightful. So it's a really important bit, and often when thinking about perhaps why did your bread turn out like it and you weren't expecting it, it turned out a little bit different, and you were thinking, why on earth has that happened? Then just be aware that perhaps this dough has not risen enough, and that's why it's really key to check that your dough is rising enough and you actually are leaving it in the bowl long enough so that your dough can rise and your yeast have time to make gas and create that light, airy bubbles in your dough. All right, so this now I'll be able to shape it and let it rise again to create a beautiful loaf of bread. And if you're interested, then you can see below that you can sign up for more bread making tips in the description of this. Just seeing someone's there saying, watching from Pakistan, it's lovely to have you. I imagine it's a bit more in the evening there, it's lunchtime here. So thank you for watching. Let me know if you're baking bread at home as well. But in the description, you'll see that you can sign up for more bread making tips and join my newsletter. And as a thank you, you'll also get three quick and simple recipes to make at home, and more information about all my online classes. So you can join me in the Epsom Bakehouse and do lots of online classes. You can learn to make everything from a crusty sandwich loaf, which will be what I'm making with this, and you can make things like baguettes, ciabatta, brioche. You can make sourdough, introduction to sourdough baking course as well, and cover lots of points like this. So talking lots in there about things to look out for when you are making bread at home. And this is all very simple as well. I'm not using any kind of, hopefully, any fancy equipment, just some bowls and scales, and just weighing that out and doing this all by hand in the kitchen. So you'll be able to follow along step by step. And there's plenty of time to stop and watch any of the videos and video courses you can buy. So lots of different videos that will contain many more bread making tips like this one, and learning exactly why you need to watch out for these signs in your dough and how that's going to help you bake even better bread at home. So do have a look. You can sign up, as I said, for my newsletter in the description of this live, and get more bread making tips like this and more information as well on my online classes. Come and join me, and there's everything there. And I know it's summer right now, but the recipes go right through the year, so there'll be ones that are seasonal breads as well. Lots of different things to try out. Just going into summer here as well, so talking more about things like barbecue breads, burger buns, things like that. Lots of different classes to do. So let me know if that's been helpful today, to know a bit more about why you should be checking that your dough has risen enough, and how to do it, how to get this beautiful domed dough full of gas, light and airy, and you're going to turn that into a delicious loaf of bread, or perhaps bread rolls, something like that. So enjoy, and it's been wonderful to chat with you all today on this live stream. I'm doing some more live streams, so if there's any questions you want answered for bread making, do let me know. You can put a comment below this live stream, and as I say, do check out the newsletter, sign up as well, and sign up if you'd like to know more bread making tips just like this one, and find out more about my online classes. And I'll be back with another live stream very, very soon to chat more about bread making at home. And if you're watching, as mentioned at the start, I'm Rhiannon, owner of the Epsom Bakehouse. So chatting all the things bread making on this channel. Do give a subscribe if it's been helpful. And I'll be back soon with another bread making tip live on YouTube. So thanks so much for watching, and I'll be seeing you again very soon.